we talked about on Tuesday night was that He wants you to have faith. He said, if you can have enough faith to say to that mountain, be thou removed and cast into the sea. Now, I don't know whether he was in the valley of Kidron at this time, and he was looking at the holy mountain, where the temple mount is now, and was looking up at it, and maybe he was saying, you know what, you're going to have to take that mountain and move it out of the way, because people worship that mountain. The mountain was not holy. People oftentimes, even in some religions, they worship statues, they worship things, and they count them as being holy. I will never forget when I was in Bible college in St. Paul, Minnesota, that we came upon a very bad automobile accident. A Cadillac had flipped upside down in a ditch, and four of the boys from the college and myself were trying to get a man out of the car, and before the car would burn. And as we were trying to get him out, there was a statue that had been attached to the dashboard of his car. And I made mention of the statue. And he said to me, I should never have this accident because I had that statue in here for protection. I said, well, I think what you need is Jesus.
Amen.
I'm not throwing stones at other people that have statues. I'm just telling you, you need Jesus. Jesus can take care of things what a statue can never take care of.
Come on.
But people get their focus on the wrong things, and Jesus was trying to tell them, don't get your focus on things. So I think it's important for the church to understand that. But I'd like to pick up now. And in verse number 46 of Luke 20, Brother Amy, if you would read for me verse number 46, and let's read from there.
Beware of the scribes, which desire to walk in long robes, and love greetings in the markets and the highest seats in the synagogues, and the chief rooms in feasts, which devour widows' houses, and for show make long prayers. The same shall receive greater damnation.
Now again, please stay with me. This is the last week of his earthly ministry. What is it that he wants to be? He wants his disciples to understand. He wants people to understand. So it was things that would be really important for those lessons to get across. If you had 1 week to live, what would you want to say to your family? What would you want them to understand and figure out what's important? It started off with go to church. And then he said, you know, you've got to be careful not to get your eyes caught up on people. And next thing he says to them is beware of scribes that desire to walk in long roads. You know, what he was saying here is be careful about looking too religious. Some people are only caught up in the way they look. Now, I believe that God does care about how you dress and how you look. He proved that in Genesis with Adam and Eve. He wasn't happy with fig leaves.
That's right.
The Bible tells us that we ought to be modestly dressed. Modest apparel, the Bible said. But when you get to that place that you want to try to look religious or become religious, that all you can do is pray these beautiful prayers with these long words in there, Jesus was trying to tell them, you got it wrong, guys. Now understand, the religious community of that day had their way of doing things. They had their rituals. He's taking his disciples and you see that? Don't do it. Now some people throw that baby out with bathwater and say, God doesn't care how you do it or what you do. I don't believe that either. There's a ditch on both sides of the road. But what he was trying to get across was to be careful. Going to Luke chapter 21. Now I'm just going to do a little expository teaching here for the next half hour. But Luke 21, start with verse number 1.
And he looked up and saw the rich man casting.
And again, Jesus is there in the temple. And he looked up and he saw a rich man what?
Casting their gifts into the treasury.
They were putting in their money. Read.
And he saw also a certain poor widow casting thither 2 mites. And he said, of a truth I say unto you, that this poor widow has cast in more than they all. For all these have of their abundance cast in the offerings of God, but she of her penury has cast in all the living that she had.
She was giving of her living. This was not something extra she had. She was giving of her living. Jesus looked and saw how people were giving that day. Some people say, well, God doesn't care how I give. He does care how you give. He does care how you give. He's laid out some things in His Word and how we ought to give and what we ought to do. The tithe, the Bible says, is holy unto the Lord. But what he was doing was he wasn't just paying attention to how much people gave. He was taking and paying attention to what they had left over. Some people give, but give out of their abundance and all, it's no big deal to me. Let me tell you something. God will bless you with what He can trust you with. I want to say that again. God will bless you with what He can trust you with.
Yeah.
What can you be faithful with?
Come on. It's good.
If God had to take you back to that place you felt comfortable in your giving, what would you be giving today? And I'm not preaching a message on giving prosperity here. I'm just telling you that God keeps good score. You don't give anything to God that He doesn't keep good score. Whether it's your time, your money, your energy, whatever you give to God, He keeps good score. But when it comes to financial blessings, you go to Malachi chapter 3, you'll find out that He promised there would be certain blessings poured out on you, that He would rebuke the devourer for your sake. There are things that God will do, but we have to understand. I just thought it was interesting. In His last week of His ministry, He paid attention to how they were given. Drop down to verse number 8.
And He said, Take heed that ye be not deceived, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ. And the time draweth near, go ye not therefore after them. But when you shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified, for these things must first come to pass.
Now, what He was saying, the next thing is, now listen, I am coming again. I want you to understand. He said, I'm going away, but I will come again, receive you unto myself. He's telling His disciples this. He said, but I need you to understand something. There are going to be a lot of false prophets coming. There are a lot of people going to come in my name. Don't be deceived. I think what He wanted His disciples to understand is the same thing He wants us to understand today. Is don't be deceived by every wave that comes by. Every little new thing that comes by. I was pastoring in Augusta, Georgia in 1988 when they wrote the book 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming in 88. And almost every church in Augusta, Georgia was buying these books by the thousands and passing them out. And a lot of Pentecostal churches were buying them. They were calling me. I got a call the weekend before it was supposed to happen from a guy in Louisiana. And he called me and he said, Pastor Blizzard, how far are you from Waynesboro, Georgia? I said, about 30 miles. He said, good. I need you to go to Waynesboro, Georgia and find my daughter and her children and get them in church. We're locked in a 3-day prayer and fasting thing we're doing at our church right now because Jesus is coming. I want my daughter to be saved. And I said, well, where does your daughter live in Waynesboro? He said, I don't know. I know she lives on a dirt road and a house trailer. Have you ever been to Waynesboro, Georgia? 80% of the roads in Waynesboro are dirt roads, and 90% of the houses are house trailers. And he wanted me to go and find his daughter because he was convinced that Jesus was going to come in the next 48 hours. Now, if I was that convinced of it, I wouldn't have sent somebody else to find them. I drove to find them all. But you see, people were upset with me because I didn't get on the bandwagon. I didn't get up and tell everybody, go sell your houses and your cars and do all these other things. There were churches that were doing that. But when He didn't come, the credibility of all of it was gone. There are a lot of people upset over this blood moon thing that was just happening this past week. And man, there have been books written about it. There have been preachers on TV preaching about it, I hear. There have been all kinds of people, just giving all kinds of warnings. Everything's the end time, the end time. I believe Jesus is coming. And I know one thing, I want to be ready. So my intent is to stay ready to keep having to get ready. That's about the safest way I know how to do it. If I stay ready, I don't have to worry about getting ready. I'll talk about that another time. But you need to understand that everybody wanted to jump onto this thing, and what he was trying to tell them, there's a lot of signs of my coming. He said, you're going to be hated of all men in verse 15 or 14. He said, you're going to be hated of all men for my name's sake. You don't want to have to worry about what everybody else is thinking about you. Or in verse 17, he said, you shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. There are a lot of people not going to like you because you baptize in Jesus' name. There are a lot of people that don't like you because you're going to pray for people in Jesus' name. But see, all the power is given unto that name.
That's right.
He went on to say, go to verse number 20 of chapter 21.
And when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is not.
Jerusalem right now is being compassed by armies. There are people taking up all kinds of arms and everything and aiming toward Jerusalem. But this is not anything new. He said it's going to happen in the last days. So he gave us the warnings of what was going to happen. Go to verse 28. I'm going to try to skip through some of this.
And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh.
He told his disciples, don't get weary with all this, boys. When you see these things happening, he said, don't quit. Lift up your head. I'm here to tell somebody today, when dark things are happening in your life and things are not going right, that's the right time to lift up your head. Your redemption draweth nigh. David would say, I look up to the hills from which cometh my help. My help comes from the Lord. You don't get help from somebody else. People will help you just a little bit along. But when you really need help, you look unto the Lord and you get all the help you need.
That's
when
right.
you look unto the Lord. Your help comes from the Lord. Go to chapter 22 and verse 1. Just pick up reading there.
Now the feast of the unleavened bread drew nigh, which is called the Passover. And the chief priests and scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people. Then entered Satan into Judas, surnamed Iscariot, being of the number of 12. And he went his way and communed with chief priests and captains, how he might betray him unto them. And they were glad and covenanted to give him money.
Said, I am going to give it right for you. I'm going to give you money if you give us Jesus. The devil's always wanted to get Jesus in his clutches. But here in this chapter, we read the story of the Passover. And we read the story of the Last Supper. We read the story of how that Jesus washed the feet of the disciples. And he said, you know what, the most humbling thing you're ever going to do is wash somebody else's feet. He said, this you ought to do. This you ought to do. It will bring you back down to where you need to be when you understand that you're no better than anybody else. We get this cocky idea in our head that we're not like everybody else and we're better than everybody else. But he would go on to say that y'all are going to deny me. In verse 31, read in verse 31.
And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat.
Simon said, I'm not going to deny you, Lord. Everybody else might. He wasn't a liar. He just couldn't see a situation that would cause him to ever want to betray Jesus. He loved Jesus. He wanted to serve him. He meant it. He gave up his fishing career. He gave up his boat, his nets to follow after Jesus. When Jesus came by and he said, follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. The Bible says straightway he left his nets. He didn't think about it. He didn't plan it out. He didn't work on it. He just got up and left. There's not many of us here that have done that. So Noel, I can see you driving that big truck, and all of a sudden Jesus said, follow me, and you just parked beside the road. Said, okay, let's go. That's exactly what happened that day. He just left the boat sitting there and said, all right, I'm with you. 3.5 years he would follow him. And Jesus told him, he said, y'all are going to deny me. He said, not me. He said, you're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crows. He said, but when thou art converted, I'm straight to that road. Now, if that had been me, I'd just tell you about 3rd chapter of Blizzard right now, okay? If Jesus had said that to me, I'd say, what do you mean when I'm converted? I just gave up my boat, my fishing. What do you mean? I've been following you around this dusty desert for 3.5. What do you mean when I am converted? I got converted way back there. See, conversion is more than just believing on me. Conversion is more than just leaving your nets. Conversion is when you've had the infilling of God's power and presence into your life with His Spirit. And Jesus was not able to tell him all of it at that time. But he said, there will come a day. He would go on to say, you shall receive power after the Holy Ghost comes upon you. You shall be witnesses unto me in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and the other parts of the earth. He's talking about that power, that dunamis power, that dynamite power that's going to come with him, filling up His Spirit. And so he was trying to get it across to Peter. You think you've got it, but you don't have it. There'd be time in the garden that would come later in that chapter where he would pray until his sweat became as great drops of blood. But I would like to change over to the book of Matthew. In Matthew chapter 20, I want to just kind of walk you through some things that are going in these next 3 or 4 chapters here in Matthew. It's all during the same time. Okay? It's all during the same last week. There are 4 different gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They all wrote from a different viewpoint the things that they saw Jesus do and the things that were needed to be recorded. So here's Matthew's rendition of it, if you will. In Matthew chapter 20 and verse number 16, read for me.
So the last shall be first.
He said, guys, I'm going to tell you something. You need to be consistent, but the last is going to be first.
And the first last.
You ever saw a kid who was going to choose, okay? We had a children's crusade here a few weeks ago, and the child evangelist up here said, I need a volunteer. You ever saw those kids? You want to be first. You don't want to be last. That's why the adults are the same way. Be first. Be first. Be first. It's all about me. He said the first will be last. The last will be first. He said first thing you got to learn to do is serve other people. He was trying to tell his disciples, let's do service our people to get it. I can hang around a young preacher for just a little while, I'll find out what my service are about. I guarantee I'll find out. Just the little things. Just the little things. Just the little things. You see, it's the little things where you're not going to get your name talked about that are important to Him. It's when you don't get any recognition for what you're doing that's important to Him. It's whenever you don't want a big show out of what you're giving that's important to Him. Because, see, it's always important to Him where the heart is. And where if you're willing to be that servant and to do what needs to be done, whether anybody ever recognizes you or not. I'm telling you, God keeps good score. God keeps real good score. And in the last week of His earthly ministry, He's trying to drive some things home to His boys and say, now listen to me, boys. Y'all going to be my face on this earth. I need you to understand something. Quit arguing about who's going to be greatest. They were walking by the way talking about, okay, when the boss is gone, who's going to take over? He went on to ask them in one place, he said, what were y'all talking about? Nothing. You ever ask the kids what they were talking about, and all of a sudden they tell you nothing? You know they were doing something. Anytime that kid says they're doing nothing, they've done something. Normally it's something they don't want you to know about. Why? Because that's the nature. We as adults sometimes are the same way. Well, I don't want anybody to know, but I do want everybody to know. You just keep doing what you are doing. God keeps good score, and He will keep up with everything that's being done. But He was trying to tell them, don't try to be first. Go down to verse number 19.
And shall deliver Him to the Gentiles, to mock, and to scourge, and to crucify Him. And on the third day He shall rise again.
He said, guys, I'm going to tell you something. You're going to have faith that I'm going to get up. You're going to see Him do some things to me that's going to shake your world. You're going to see Him beat me. You're going to see Him hang me on the cross. He said, but I just want you to understand, it's all part of the plan. See, they weren't expecting Jesus to go to the cross. They weren't expecting Jesus to pay that kind of a price. They thought that He was going to set up His kingdom right here. I'm going to tell you something. God's not going to do things the way you think He ought to do. But He will get them. He will get them. You're going to have to learn to trust Him and to believe Him, to have faith in Him, that He will get it done. But He was trying to tell them that you're going to have faith that on the third day, I'm going to get up. The third day, sometimes you're going to fight some battles in your life, and you're going to feel like you're all alone. But you're not alone. You're not alone. When you become a Christian, doesn't mean you don't have no problems. Anybody here been a Christian, you've had problems raising Him? There's a few of us. There's a few more of us, and some of y'all just had sunk in on them. You know the difference between being a Christian and not being a Christian when you got a problem? Is that you're not in that problem by yourself. I go to the rock of my salvation. I go to the one that the builders rejected. I run to the mountain, and the mountain stands by me. When the world all around me sinking sand, on Christ's solid rock I stand. You're going to find that strength in Him. Doesn't mean you're not going to have a problem. Doesn't mean you're not going to have a struggle. Doesn't mean you're not going to face trial. But the difference is you're going to have Jesus to take you through the problem. That's the difference in having it all. He tried to tell the guys, have faith in God. And then go down to verse number 28.
Even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many.
You know what? When he gives his life as a ransom for many, you need to understand, he gives his life to be good for many. He gives his life to the guy standing on the street corner holding up the sign, why lie? I need a beer. Okay? He gives his life to me. We judge too many people and say, oh man, they can't be saved. Look at that. That's a bum. Except for the grace of God, there I go. Except for the grace of God, I don't deserve to be in this pulpit today. You hear me? It's because of the grace of God. Not because of anything good about me. It's the grace of God. You are where you are today because of the grace of God. He said, I didn't come to be ministered to, but I came to save people. I read the story of Dwight Eisenhower when he was a 4-star general, and we were going to war and against Hitler, and he was there the night before the flyers would take off to go and to do the bombing raid, and they weren't sure whether it was going to work or not. And all through that night, he walked among the company of those soldiers, of those airmen, and he encouraged every one of them and said, come on guys, I'm with you. I want you to know I'm praying for you. Here was their 4-star general, their commander-in-chief, if you will, of that part of the world, and he's telling them, I'm going to stay with you. You can do this. We're behind you. But when the last bomber took off, the history tells us that he walked into an office and he took a pen and paper and he began to write to the President of the United States. And he says, I want you to know some of the finest young men in all of our country are now in the air to go on a mission that I'm not sure will be successful. But I want to write this before anything happens. If this mission turns out to be a disaster, it's nobody's fault but mine. I take full responsibility for it because I'm the one that sent them into battle. And if it fails, no shame on them. It's all on them. When you read history, we won. Eisenhower became a war hero. He became a war hero. But what if it had failed? He'd already taken responsibility for the failure. That's the kind of man they wanted to lead. You understand that? When Patton could not get gasoline for his tanks to go in and get the troops that were stranded behind the enemy lines, they said he sat down and cried and begged over the radio to the truck drivers to get him more gas because he couldn't do what he needed to do. Why? Because that's the kind of leader that he was. Jesus was that kind of leader. He said, I came to give my life as a ransom. He didn't know whether you were going to serve him or not. He didn't know whether this little boy from Basillio, Georgia was going to rise up to serve him or not. He had to take a chance that we were willing to do it. He didn't know whether his own disciples would run out on him. You say, oh no. But everybody else walked away. Jesus looked at his disciples and said, are y'all going to go too far? He wasn't sure anybody was going to stay. Sometimes you're going to have some lonely times. You're just going to have to realize that you didn't come to be ministered to every time. Sometimes you're going to have to reach out and help other people. He gave his life in hope that somebody would serve him. Verse 34 of this 20th chapter.
So Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. And immediately their eyes received sight, and they followed him.
Here were the blind men that were beggars. And when they would try to call out, in another place, blind Bartimaeus would call out, and the crowd tried to make them be quiet. And that crowd included the disciples. Hey, you're not dressed right to come to Jesus. You don't smell right to come to Jesus. You can't do this to come to Jesus. Wait a minute. Jesus said, tell them to just put a pork in it and bring them here. And guess what? He opened the blinded eyes, and guess what they did? They followed him. When blind Bartimaeus was sitting by the road as a beggar, and he cried out, they told him to be quiet. The Bible said he cried out that much louder. Blind Bartimaeus, why don't you be quiet? He said, because you're not blind. I got one shot at this. Jesus is coming by. I'm going to be heard. Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me. I love the way Jesus does it. He stopped. And he didn't say, Bartimaeus, come here. He turned to the same crowd and said, y'all, imagine that. Fred over here just said, fire He looks up, Jesus looking right at him and said, come here. Excuse me, Bartimaeus, Jesus wants you. I think they just had to put it right back on the same guy that told him to be quiet and told him also to get it. And Jesus said, what do you want? He said, my eyesight. He said, look, there it is. And Jesus told Bartimaeus, go thy way. And the Bible, the very next verse says he followed Jesus in the way. What's so important about that? Because Bartimaeus didn't have any hope for tomorrow. But when he found Jesus, all of his hope was wrapped up in Jesus. His tomorrow was to follow Jesus in the way. Hear me. When he saved me, I didn't have a tomorrow. But guess what? When he gave me salvation, he gave me a tomorrow, and I decided to follow Jesus. I like that old song. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I won't turn back. I won't turn back. You know what some of you need to trying to make up your mind. You're going to follow Jesus. You just need to make up your mind. You're going to follow Jesus. Well, I don't know where that road's going to take me. Let me tell you something. It's going to take you a lot better road than where you were going. Sin may be fun, but its retirement's a bitch. Its retirement is no good. Jesus would go on to say that he that will seek after me with their whole heart shall find me. What about your whole heart? Have you ever decided to seek him with your whole heart? What if you decided to make Jesus very personal in your life? With your whole heart, you'll seek after him. What would happen? What would change? What would be different? I won't take time to go to it. In the book of John, the 12th chapter, we won't go there right now, but the Bible said that Mary brought that very precious ointment. This all happened in the last week of his ministry, and anointed his feet. And the odor filled the room. One of the disciples said, why did you waste that? It was never a waste. Anything you give to God is never a waste. Any praise you give to God is never a waste. Any prayer meeting you have with God is never a waste. Any testimony you give for Jesus is never a waste.